Hello and welcome to For the Good of All with Lorenzo Chambers. I'm your host, Lorenzo Chambers. Welcome to episode 3 of the podcast. Welcome back. Hopefully you are not just entertained, but moved to action in your journey towards your better version or the highest version of yourself in this physical realm, let's say. I just want to kind of recap a couple of big ideas that we talked about on previous episodes. And so the first is my last book that I wrote, which is entitled For the Good of All and to the Harm of None, really kind of is the basis of the initial episodes of this podcast. But once we kind of get through the book portion of the episodes, then the episodes or the podcast will morph into more social commentary. But in each episode that I do now, there is social commentary. But in terms of big ideas, the first is the framework of the episodes, the podcast, the conversations, the community is based on the 4A's protocol. And so the 4A's, one is agree. What do we agree on in the community in reference to the advancement of the well-being of humanity? What do we aspire to? What do we assume? What do I assume? What do you assume? For better or for worse, what are the challenges? Some assumptions are good, not all. And then finally, argue. And I purposely put argue last because everyone wants to argue. That's the world we live in, unfortunately. But when we disagree or argue, we will not be disagreeable because we need to respect each other's humanity, differences of opinions, as long as at the end of the day we are not hurting people. I think that's going to be super important. So that's the framework as we move to develop a philanthropic mindset about our lives. And basically, my idea of a philanthropic mindset is one that engages in activities to advance the well-being of humanity. And I think that that's going to be important. Humanity, i.e. the human race, as in there is only one race, which is the human race. All other races are social constructs, and we'll kind of deal with those ideas. And then lastly, the idea that I want all of us to consider, and hopefully it will resonate, is the idea that we are spiritual beings engaged or having a physical experience. So that's a whole nother podcast. So some of the big ideas I want to talk about, and then I'm going to talk about some social commentary that I wanted to offer. One is on a recent social media post that I saw about Dave Chappelle. It's an old post, but it's still relevant in terms of big ideas and how we move in this world. And then I want to have some thoughts on Elon Musk. What a combination, Dave and Elon. I want to continue in my book, For the Good of All and to the Harm of None, with the chapter that's entitled Daily Conversations of the Oppressed. And basically, it's conversations that I have with people, my friends, family members, and what goes on when I think about most Americans. I think most of us are oppressed in some way or another. And these conversations are conversations of substance that I grew up listening to from the working class members of my family, the city workers, which I thought had intent and purpose to help them along their life journey. So we all are aware of the insurrection, January 6, 2021. The next day, January 7th, 2021, at 7:30 p.m., I was having a conversation with one of my good friends about what happened. And one of the things that my friend began with was the idea of, if the insurrection was spearheaded by people of color, then there would have been a different outcome. And so the idea is that it kind of all boils back down to white supremacy and white privilege and the consequences that are matched to the color of our skins. which is quite unfortunate. So even back in 2021, this is now 2026, Trump's presidency was an epic failure. In the last 100 years, Trump is the fifth incumbent to fail to be reelected. That means subsequent terms, as reported by Newsweek, November 2nd, 2020. President-elect Joe Biden defeated Trump by approximately 7 million votes. That is the second largest margin of victory in the history of presidential elections, as reported by NBC News, December 2nd, 2020. Despite the historic failure of Trump's presidency, 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. And then we talked about, COVID and, just, going off on tangents and having conversations on what was relevant. Obviously, 2021, COVID was still relevant. And just how Trump handled that situation. And so I said to my friend during the conversation that 350,000 people at that time had died in the country. And then I asked my Alexa, how many people died in World War II, World War I, and the Americans in the Vietnam War. In World War I, 116,516 people, Americans died. World War II, 405,000 people died. And the Vietnam War, 282,000 Americans died. And so obviously COVID-19 was a war zone, basically. And so we talked about just how people, if we're all just people, just take away these constructed categories of race and white supremacy, we could impact all of us in a better way, right? But the problem is that people are voting and acting against their own best interests for several reasons, and we'll talk about those. But today I wanted to kind of reference Jonathan Metzl's book, Dying of Whiteness. And every episode, hopefully, I'll probably have some book reference because I'm a reader. I think we all should be readers. And so in his book, Dying of Whiteness, he writes of case studies in places like Franklin, Tennessee, Olathe, Kansas, Cape Girardeau, Mississippi. And specifically, he asked people about contested political issues under the Trump administration. Specifically, he asked about healthcare, gun violence, education, and the scope of government. In Metzl's book, he quotes George Washington University economist Michael O. Moore as saying, Trump voters stand to suffer more from Obamacare repeal and a trade war. 2021, 2026. Sounds familiar? According to Metzl, in a Fox News March 2017 interview with Tucker Carlson, Trump was in the interview with Tucker Carlson. When told that the counties that voted for you, Trump, middle and working class counties, would do far less well under the proposed repeal of the Affordable Care Act, Trump responded, I know that. It's very preliminary. No plans, no consequences, no thought to consequences, giving you insight into the man's character. Dying of Whiteness explores the idea of the seemingly difficulty of white people to consider alternate realities other than a white supremacist ideology, or to emphasize with ethnic groups other than their own without feeling a sense of treason against whiteness. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about all white people, right? Because obviously there are good white human beings, just like good black and brown Asian human beings. But there is a disproportionate number and percent of white people who identify with white supremacy. In Missouri, Metzl explores pro-gun advocacy in a state where white men are disproportionately killed by self-inflicted gunshot wounds. Metzl shows how lax gun laws ultimately cost the state roughly $273 million in lost work between 2008 and 2015, and ultimately led to the loss of over 10,506 years of productive white male life. That's Metzl. In Tennessee, he explores the impact of the state's efforts to block participation in the Affordable Care Act that cost every single white resident of the state 14.1 days of life. Finally, in Kansas, We see the impact of the largest income tax cut in the state's history on cutbacks to public education. White student populations saw a flatlining in test scores and an increase in high school dropout rates. According to Metzel, 688 additional white students dropped out of Kansas public high schools in the first 4 years of budget cuts than would have done so otherwise. On average in the United States, dropping out of high school correlates with 9 years of lost life expectancy. It's pretty heavy. So the idea was, people would lower the taxes, or the largest income tax cut on the wealthy, right? Probably assumedly. And the correlation on the cutbacks in education. So your largest income tax cut back public school, what happens? We all suffer. What I found that makes Dying of Whiteness a compelling read for all Americans is that Metzel identifies himself as a white American from the Midwest. His account of white Americans dying to preserve their privileges of whiteness cannot be dismissed as the rant of a disgruntled member of the minority communities of our country, right? So when someone who looks like someone from that community starts speaking up the same language, then for better or for worse, people may listen differently or listen more or take things into consideration as opposed to a non-member of that community. But the bottom line is truth has no color. 60 Minutes did an expose on Facebook asserting that they knowingly allowed and actually promoted negative news because negative news is stimulating and gets the most response. In my book, the next sentence that I wrote was that I was in the process of getting rid of my Facebook page, and for about a year, maybe a year and a half, I was not on social media at all because my heart was broken. My soul ached because of all the negativity. I'm now back on social media because it's not necessarily the tool itself, it's how it's being used. And I want to encourage all of us to use it in positive ways that uplift people. I think that's super, super important. I also think it's important to minimize time on social media. I want to encourage all of you to, if you haven't seen the movie on Netflix, it's titled The Social Dilemma. And basically, it's a documentary on employees on various social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. And these employees who had integrity left the work because of how the technology was designed in terms of knowingly feeding the pleasure centers of the mind for immediate gratification. And so to that end, I'm only going to be doing this, once or twice a week. I don't want to get caught up in the everyday addiction of social media. And that is my challenge to all of us. I just want to say that, and hopefully you guys will read the book. It's available on Amazon. If you search books by Lorenzo Alexander Chambers, or if you search For the Good of All and To the Harm of None by Lorenzo Alexander Chambers, you should be able to come across the book. And I'll end this segment with this. The conversations among many that I have on a daily basis with my circle of friends and family are catalytic for me as a reminder of the subtle and nuanced inequities that persist among and between human beings, the weight of which is too burdensome for the world to bear without eventual collapse. I submit that we stand on the proverbial precipice, staring into the undeniable and abysmal collapse of society. Yeah, I think that's where that's what's happening. I don't know. I'm sure other people see it differently. I'd like to hear your comments and feedback, and we're going to talk more about that as well. As always, the promotion, I'd like you all to please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel at Lorenzo Chambers Podcast. Lorenzo Chambers Podcast. On Instagram, it's Lorenzo For the Good. 4 is the number 4, not the word FOR. So it would be Lorenzo, the number 4, the good. And same for TikTok, at Lorenzo For the Good. I'm also in the process of launching a website coming soon to your community. I want to talk a little bit about Dave Chappelle and Elon Musk. There was something came up on social media, like kind of circling back. That's another thing too. You know, it's forever, right? This happened several years ago, but I saw the post maybe a week ago. And basically the interviewer talked to Dave Chappelle about the Jamal Khashoggi assassination. I believe it was 2017, 2018. And subsequent to that, Dave accepted the invitation to go to Saudi Arabia, that area, to do a show or several shows and make millions. And so the interviewer was asking Dave, how does he reconcile, knowing or understanding, right? Because I guess it wasn't proven, but having an understanding that that happened to Jamal Khashoggi. And Dave pretty much talked about the idea of, well, there's bad things happening all over the world. And, United States, we kill people, everybody, different countries are doing whatever they do. If you get in, he kind of talked about, if you start down the lane of, what we're going to do, what are we not going to do based on others' actions, then it becomes a slippery slope in terms of, for example, I think he mentioned, then we shouldn't have cell phones because of the slave labor and what happens in the African countries that source what's needed to make the cell phones and so forth, right? Same thing, Nike and China, et cetera, et cetera. And then he said, there are a lot of people who are going over to Saudi Arabia since the Jamal Khashoggi incident, including recently, Live Golf, those guys took Saudi money. So that was a big idea, taking Saudi money. And then Dave said, but when the black man takes the Saudi money, then it's a problem. And so I had a conversation with my friend, and about this. I'm like, just what's your opinion? He said he rocks with Dave on taking the money. He's like, get the money. And so we disagreed, but we weren't disagreeable, right? We're still cool. And he pointed to the idea of, back when Dave was kind of being persecuted a little bit, but everyone thought he was crazy. And I think he turned down 50 million or maybe 500 million. And I guess he moved to Africa. I don't know, but he left the business for a while. And my boy was like, he suffered from that. But my counterpoint was that he came back and probably made more money, right? All the specials that he did. And so, having shown some integrity in that moment, when he returned to comedy, it elevated his status, it increased his leverage, and he probably made more money. And so I was trying to make the point that had Dave made a stand and not taken Saudi money, again, it would have elevated his platform. I think it would have spoke to people around the globe in terms of giving us encouragement and having us aspire to a higher degree of integrity. And it would have launched his career even further. I personally like Dave. I've seen all of his shows. I think they've been very edgy. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, that kind of hurt, especially when it comes to the LGBTQT community. That's definitely been a sticking point. But I think on this day, if you reflect on it, I would hope that you would have done something different. And perhaps maybe we'll get a chance to chop it up one day. Finally, little Elon Musk. So he's been very active on X account, I guess. He's been very active about how the white race is dying and they need to procreate and they're being, marginalized, and it just sounds insane. Like he's living, obviously, in his own bubble, right? By 2042, by the year 2042, it's been estimated that by that time, white people will probably be the minority in the United States. Interracial marriages and relationships within the construct of this social race, of this race paradigm, is already kind of blurring the lines. And so it's a failed effort, right? He's the epitome of the 1%, right? He's out of touch, doesn't understand, and it's sad. So Elon, if there's any, I don't know what to say, man. I don't know. I was gonna say if there's any integrity in you, maybe one day you'll change your way. But regardless, the power is to the people. I challenge all of us. I don't want to say challenge, but I question if you don't really rock with Elon, I don't think you should drive a Tesla, right? The kind of two go hand in hand. So when I see Teslas, I'm automatically get an idea of who that person may or may not be based on their understanding of who Elon Musk is. Same thing with X. I don't have an account on X, right? Because then like it seems, I think hypocritical is too far of a word. I mean, I think we're all dealing with conflict. It's just a matter of the levels of it. So get off X and trade in your Tesla. Before I leave, I just want to say power to the people for the good of all. That's a living mantra for me and for you. May the universe continue to conspire on your behalf. And the question always, what will be your verse in the poem of life?